My iPad completely stopped working. A device failure can happen for a bunch of different reasons. A slip while carrying it, getting knocked off a table, an unlucky rainy day. But until my iPad randomly stopped working one day, I didn't realize just how heartbreaking the consequences could be. Not just because I was losing a device, but I could have easily lost over a decade's worth of art. And it doesn't even take a device failure. A normal software update or someone accidentally deleting the Procreate app could have caused the same nightmare scenario, which is why I didn't even pretend to do it in the clip you just saw. I know this sounds dramatic, but I really started freaking out while researching how Procreate art is backed up for a couple of reasons. First, looking up how the backups worked, I kept seeing stories like these, which were devastating to read. Second, I was really surprised to find out just how little access we actually have to our iCloud backup files. See, from what I understand, this is how it works. Assuming you're using iCloud to back up your iPad, all of your art lives in the gallery of the Procreate app, which lives in your iPad backup. This backup of your whole device is then what's sent to iCloud and stored. Which reminds me, if you do use iCloud for Procreate backups, please make absolutely sure that the Procreate toggle in your settings is turned on so that Procreate is actually backed up. You can find that setting via the Settings app, your Apple ID, then iCloud, Show All, and then you'll find the toggle right here. Back to the backup story. Like I mentioned, your Procreate app backup lives in the bigger full iPad backup, which is what gets sent to the cloud. But here's the thing. As far as I could find, and please let me know in the comments below if I've missed anything, we can't access either the Procreate app backup or the device backup. The files live there in a spot that we just can't get to. So sure, my drawings were getting backed up somewhere, but I can't get into that somewhere and copy that file to a spot that I control. So we're violating the 3-2-1 rule here. Don't worry, we'll come back to that too if you haven't heard about it before. Now, remember when I mentioned not even wanting to pretend to delete the Procreate app from my iPad? Here's why that's so scary. Since all of our drawings are stored as Procreate app data, once you delete the app, all of your art's deleted with it. By default, there's no other backup to another location, so for one thing, as soon as your app's deleted, you've already lost any new work you've made since your last successful iCloud backup. And then, as soon as the next backup to iCloud starts and overrides what's already there, now you've officially lost everything. This means a couple of adorable taps from a tech-savvy toddler could erase all of your treasured work without you even knowing it. Now you might be wondering, okay, what exactly triggers those iCloud updates to start anyway? You're not alone, I didn't know that either, so here's how it works. Your iPad should automatically start a backup when it's number 1, connected to Wi-Fi, number 2, connected to power, and number 3 is locked. You can also manually initiate a backup by going into the Settings app again, then click on your Apple ID, then iCloud Backup, and then Backup Now. Here's the thing with these backups though, remember that it's your entire iPad device that's getting backed up, so the files can get pretty huge. The backup of my current iPad is around 83 gigabytes. That's a lot of data to upload to the cloud, and depending on how fast your internet connection is, it could take ages to complete. It could also fail and not finish at all. Quick note, you can make a local backup using your computer, but there's enough friction in that process that I know I'm probably not going to do it regularly, and again, we'd still be in that situation with a backup of the whole device instead of just our art. So what if I did just want to back up one or a few files, maybe the latest thing that I was working on or a few recent files? Is my only option to back up the entire iPad? There's gotta be a better way, right? Well, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is there is a better way. The bad news is it's mostly manual, but I did come up with a system to make it, number 1, easy-ish. It still takes time, but number 2, it's organized so that you don't just end up with a giant mess when you're done. The first step in this process I'll mention is optional, but I think it'll give you the best chance for success since some of the steps will involve bundling and exporting large-ish amounts of data. I recommend first closing any background apps that you don't really need to have running while we do this. Depending on your iPad, you do this with a 2-finger tap on the home button or swiping up from the bottom of the screen to see all of the active apps. Then just flick them away with an upward swipe to close all the stuff you're not using. The second step is to organize our art into stacks. You can organize them however you want, but grouping the work into stacks will make our export steps a lot easier. So for example, I could group all of these lowercase Blackletter designs into one stack, and then these graffiti style lettering designs into another. So we'll just grab one and then tap on the rest to add them to the stack. Here we go. And we'll drag them over this one to create a brand new stack of all of those letters. I could do it again with this one. So let's just grab, that's like a graffiti A. Here are all these T's. Let's grab all of those and let's drag them over this one. And now we've got a second stack with those graffiti letters. Grouping our art into stacks also helps with the next step, which is renaming the art files. And I know this is going to be the most time-consuming step, but I promise it's worth it. You'll see why after we export the files. While renaming the art, consider coming up with a structure that'll group similar files together. For example, if I dive into the stack that we just made with the lowercase letters right here, I might want to go with something like this for the naming. Let's rename this one that currently is titled Untitled Artwork here. And we'll call this one minuscule. It's the fancy word for lowercase p. And then done. And then if I have different variations for a single letter, I can just add a description at the end of the name. So let's go with this one. I'm going to call this one minuscule b. And I did this one for the YouTube video thumbnail. So that looks good. This one is minuscule b. Call that one YouTube. It's original. This one is minuscule q. And this one is minuscule b, black and white. And now I've renamed all of the files that are in this stack. By the way, if you want to see a tutorial of how to make this snazzy Blackletter B right here in Procreate, I'll pop a link to that video right now. Once we've made it through renaming all of the files, now it's time to decide where to back up your files. It boils down to whether your iPad supports external drives or not. If it does, you can opt to put your backup files there on an external drive, or if it doesn't, you can use another cloud service like Files, which is basically iCloud, Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. For the example today, I'll just be using the Files app to make it easy. So we're just going to come down here, pull the files up vertically, and then drag it to the side of the screen. Next, from here, I'm just going to tap up here to create a new folder, and then I'm just going to add today's date. So 2024, I'll do a -07, and I'm recording this on the 28th. So now I've got my new folder inside of my Files app. Inside this main folder with the date, we'll create another folder and call it Procreate. So I'll just tap here, and then tap here to create another folder, and we are going to call this one Procreate. Now that we've got the Procreate folder, we're going to tap it to open it up. Then I'm going to back up to my stack. Now all we have to do is drag the stack we just created from Procreate over into the Files app. I recommend a little patience while the files load. Depending on how many there are in the stack and how large they are, this can take a few minutes, and it can also depend on the type of iPad that you're using. After we pull the stack over, we get an export of all the individual files that lived inside it. But since we put the time into renaming each one of them, we should now have a very clear list of what each file is instead of the untitled artwork mess that we'd otherwise get. From here, we would just repeat this drag and drop step for each of the stacks in our gallery. So for example, I could grab that graffiti stack. Again, I haven't renamed all of these files, so these will be a little bit more messy. But once this completes, all of those files will be transferred over to the Files app as well. Again, we just need to repeat this drag and drop step for each of the stacks in the gallery and for any loose files that may be hanging out in there too. I also want to share a couple of troubleshooting tips because there are a couple of things that I've run into over the years doing these exports. Number one, it's possible that the stack might be too large. If you run into the situation where the export fails, try splitting the stack into individual smaller ones and then try again with those. This second issue might only be applicable if you've been using Procreate for a while like me, but some of your older files may be troublemakers, as I like to call them, and they might stall the export process. If you run into this issue, open the stack that has the troublemaker file and start exporting groups of files within the stack by selecting them individually and pulling them over until you find the troublemaker or the troublemaker files. So for example, going back to that first stack that we created, I would tap to open it and then tap select. And I would just start picking individual files and dragging and dropping those over until I found the single file that wouldn't move. And that file would be my troublemaker file. There may be a few of them in the same stack. As an example, if I back up here and go to my Calligraphy stack, which is down here, I already know that some of my older calligrams that I made here in Procreate are some of the troublemaker files. So for example, if I try to grab this Batman file and pull it over into my Files app, no matter how long I wait, this export never completes. Even though it isn't a big file and I just pulled the one file over, for some reason, this one will never export with this method. You can even see here, if I try to select this file and export it as a Procreate file using the share feature, it results in an unsuccessful export error. So in this case, I would still use the share feature and I would just export the file using a different format. For me, that tends to work. By the way, a quick note to mention that if you'd like a step-by-step summary guide that will walk you through this entire backup process, you can grab it at procreatepowerpack.com. I also want to take a second to say a huge thank you for your support. Your views, likes, subscribing to the channel, and purchases of products from my shop are what make it possible for me to keep making these videos. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all of your support. Now let's jump back to the last steps of the process. Once you have all your stacks backed up, including any troublemakers, congratulations, you can rest a little easier knowing that you've got a backup that you control now. But we're not quite done yet. I recommend that you also back up your files using another, more universal file format so that you can open the files in other apps other than Procreate. The only one that I found that still keeps all the layers from the original Procreate file is PSD, which is the Photoshop file format. Technically, TIFF files can also support layers, but from my tests, Procreate just makes a flattened image when you export as a TIFF file, so that's not quite as useful. So here's what this process is going to look like. First, I'm going to tap select, and then I'm going to pick my stack, then select share. We'll pick the PSD file format now. It'll take a few seconds here to generate the export file. Now that the export bundle's been built, I'm just going to tap to save to files, and then I'm going to open the folder that we created earlier. Next, I'll create a new folder in here. Tap here. New folder, and we'll call this one PSD for those Photoshop files. Now that we're in the PSD folder, we'll tap save. Now if I tap up here and go back to the main view, you'll see that we have our files backed up in two different formats. The very last step of this process that I recommend is to copy all the files that we just created to at least one other device, like an external hard drive or another cloud service. You can now easily do this by plugging in any external drive to your iPad or a computer with access to your iCloud drive, Dropbox, Google Drive, wherever we just created this first backup. Then just drag and drop the files over from the Procreate backup folder onto the new drive. Personally, I keep backups on other external drives and at a minimum follow the 3-2-1 rule, which is a recommended system where you have at least 3 copies of your files on 2 different media or 2 different devices, like 2 different external drives, with at least one of those backups being in a different physical location from where the other drives are. I absolutely follow this rule because it really is heartbreaking to lose any work, but especially the artwork that we love making and has so much meaning to us. Which brings me back to this, my iPad that stopped working. Did I lose everything? No, in this case, I was lucky, but I definitely wasn't as well protected as I usually am with all my other data. At the time, I'd already upgraded to a newer iPad, the one that you just saw that I was working with in the video, so I was lucky that I didn't lose any work, but I would have definitely lost some of the most recent work I'd made if that wasn't the case. Now I've got my own backup, so I feel much safer. And I've also come up with a system for keeping that backup updated so I don't have to go through all of the steps that we just walked through to create the first one. I've also been thinking of upgrading that system a bit and sharing it with you, so please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Based on your feedback, the next video walking through that system might be right here, but until then, here's one with over 50 Procreate tips and a tutorial of a really important concept for working with art images and photos too. In the meantime, keep writing, keep playing, and have a fantastic day. I'll see you next time.